Okay, so this is class 13 in Beaker, Chicago, Touching a City's Soul, the learning, the teaching that the previous Rebbe did when he came to visit Chicago. And we are on page 72, section 5. We'll just review for a minute, sort of to catch us up, what we, not from all the way from the beginning, but from this last idea that we're in the middle of. We've been talking about how in the house of Israel, right, amongst the Jewish people, there's what's called souls that are the seed of man and souls that are called the seed of animal, Zera Adam and Zera Behema, and that basically the difference between them is that the souls that are called the seed of man are coming from a very high level in the spiritual realms, the worlds of Atzilus, and they have a really conscious awareness of Hashem that they actually feel. They can actually sense the presence of Hashem. This is kind of very rare. This is a rare level of a soul. And then the souls that are called the seed of animal, they don't have that same level of conscious awareness of Hashem to the same extent. What they do have is they have a grasp of Hashem. They can learn a lot from Sfarim and from people. They can have a really clear comprehension, but it's not the same type of sensing of actually feeling. And this is a much more common level. And basically that difference is called das. That das is this conscious, introspective consciousness, which leads to a sensing of godliness, of Hashem. And it by itself, a person is actually sensing the godliness. So the previous article goes on to talk about this is true that there are souls that have this sense and souls that don't, have this conscious awareness, and souls that don't, even though we are all what's called maamirim b'nei maamirim, believers, the sons of believers. And so, like, how could we all have emunah, which is a higher level than das in the spheres, when we don't all have this actualized das? I mean, every soul has all of these qualities, but we're talking about like a fully activated das. Not everybody has, but everybody has this emunah. So how could it be that we have a higher level and we don't necessarily have this lower level affecting us? And then, so we talked about the fact that emunah is like an encompassing soul power. It's something that's compared to a crown, like a crown sits on top of a head. Whereas das is like part of the brain. It's compared to the part of the brain that's like actually internal, that affects us in a different way. So the idea is that das, what the pasuk, the main pasuk that sort of proves this point is das, you should know the God of your fathers. And the second half of the verse is, and you will serve him with a full heart. And the previous Rebbe explains that means this das, this level of das, which is this conscious awareness and sensing of godliness, automatically leads to serving God with a full heart. Like that's why it's two halves of the same pasuk, right? To know your God, know the God of your fathers, know da, the same word as das, and you will serve him with a full heart. That because this das impacts our behavior. When we like know something so clearly that we sense it, it impacts our behavior. And not only impacts our behavior, the reason why it impacts our behavior is because when we have this conscious awareness and sensing of godliness, we like see God everywhere. Like we experience him in a conscious way everywhere. And that leads to the fact that he's always in our awareness and our consciousness, which means that we're never going to be sinning because Hashem is so much in front of us. Like we can't sin. It's like we wouldn't come to doing that because his presence is so present. Like we wouldn't do something that would be inappropriate. Also, this level of das leads to a deeper love and awe of Hashem. Like we talked about briefly, that das connects the intellect to the emotions, not just the intellect to the actions, right? It connects both the intellect to the emotions and the intellect to the actions, but the emotion part is that it gives birth to love and awe of Hashem, which also comes naturally to the Jew, right? It's part of the package that is pre-programmed into our hard drive. But again, it's a different level of love and awe of Hashem when it is effectuated by this level of das, about this level of like this really clear comprehension, awareness of Hashem. And that it is that those two things where it leads to our service of Hashem and it leads to a sort of a deeper love and awe only comes about from this like this activated das. I'm just calling it like activated das. So this is compared to the previous Rebbe starts comparing the difference between sort of like having an activated das and not. There's the difference between seeing and hearing. That when a person sees something, that it's a conscious awareness. It's like being awake. When you're sleeping, your eyes are working, but they're not seeing anything. When you're awake, your eyes are open and you're actually seeing something. So and this das is the seeing is a parable, because the idea is that you're seeing something in your mind's eye. You're not actually seeing God, right? Like, but we're sensing God. It's as if a person is seeing something in their mind's eye, and that affects us. When we see something in our mind, when we see something in our mind's eye, it affects us on a much deeper level than if we just hear. The contrast is to hearing something, which means that we're just understanding something. We're not actually consciously aware and sensing it. We're just understanding it. That's like hearing. Hearing is understanding, and that means we're contemplating it in our mind, but we're not actually like seeing it in our mind. And that doesn't affect us as much. I mean, it's not that it doesn't affect us at all, but it doesn't affect us as much or as deeply. And then the next idea about seeing is that seeing is compared to chachma, of the chachma, which is the first of the 10 spheros, the 10 soul powers, and it's also the first of the 3 intellectual soul powers. Whereas hearing is compared to bina, which is the second soul power and the second of the 3 intellectual soul powers. And chachma changes the person, like it's like a new insight. It's like the eureka. It's like understanding something. It's like, oh, I get it. And it's like, oh, right now I need to do something else about this because I get it. Like, oh, okay. And that would lead a person not to sinning. Like, oh, I get it. God's real. This world is covering over godliness. It's not the other way around. Oh, I get it. So like, okay, I need to do Torah mitzvahs. Whereas hearing, which is bina, which is understanding and contemplating, it does affect a person, but it doesn't affect a person the same way. It affects the person maybe while they're thinking about it, while they're contemplating it. And then the previous service says when they go about their regular business, they sort of like leave that behind and they move on to the next thing. So it's not as long lasting or like life-changing. It's like in the moment when the person is surrounded by it and contemplating it. So then the last section of the section that we did last week just goes on to this idea that Hashem doesn't connect an evil thought to a deed, but he does attach a positive thought to a deed. That's where we sort of left off. This because all this thinking and contemplating and everything. So talking about like he mentions this as like a sort of a new-ish idea, and then we're going to go on to talk about more about this idea of the good and not good, and then the faith and this seeing and sensing. He's going to connect it to the 2 paragraphs of Shema, this idea to 2 paragraphs of Shema in this section. So we're on page 72, section 5. Are there any questions before we start?
I have a question. I remember hearing something that at Mount Sinai, they heard what they saw and they saw what they heard. Right. Is this kind of what you're saying? So there, everything was together? Yeah, that's a nice way. That's a nice connection you're making. Right, they saw, so there it explains that they saw what's usually heard and they heard what's usually seen. What that is explained to mean is that usually like godliness and things that are spiritual realities is usually something that you hear about. It's like we can't really understand it. We just hear about it. We take it on faith, so to speak.
But at Sinai, we saw it, meaning it became became absolutely true to us. And the physical world, which is something that we usually see and experience as real, we just heard about, like, it sort of became a little bit more distant from our reality. So that experience transformed the Jewish nation forever and imprinted it like on our soul, that we have the ability to, at some level, maybe not every moment of our life, but at some level be able to reach this idea that, God is the reality. This world is, a world that God created, but it's not the independent existence and importance that it makes itself out to be.
Okay.
So it is connected, yeah. In general, hearing and seeing this is like talked about in many different places in the Torah and Chassidus, like this dynamic between hearing and seeing. So, okay. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. So let's go into the text, page 72. So, however, all of the above refers to the attribute of goodness, meaning this idea of the good thoughts and actions and bad thoughts and actions and so on. Whereas the attribute of punishment, God does not attach an evil thought to a deed. Thus, the evil thought and the person's actions are not attached, but it is only that they are unattached that a trace of the thought nevertheless remains. If a person has an evil thought, like a bad thought. However, through the avodah of histalkos, remember that's the idea of seeing, that's like chachma, the mind's eye, and really seeing and sensing something. Even the trace of an evil thought is removed. This is like a cleansing. When a person gets to that level of seeing godliness, it like erases the evil thought, because the evil thought is a misunderstanding of the world, I guess, in a sense you could say. So therefore, it removes it. I was going to go on to another idea. This avodah, this avodah of histalkos, is the food of faith that strengthens one's emunah. Meaning, we can strengthen our emunah by this intense activation of das. That's what grounds our emunah in us, which is ultimately the last section of the maamarim. What the previous Rebbe is going to say, that's what Moshe did. Moshe grounded our emunah in us through helping us develop our das. Meaning, that's how you ground a person's emunah. So then you not only have an activated das, you also have an activated emunah. So you're like, really good situation to be in.
Chaya, can you repeat that, please? What you just said? That idea.
So that this avodah is the food of faith, food that strengthens one's emunah. This avodah of histaklos, this idea of like this gazing intently in your mind's eye, which the previous Rebbe is connecting to the idea of das, like activating the das, right? It's like he's going to talk more about combining chachma and bina. I think it's in this section. But that idea of activating one's das is what is like called the food of faith. It strengthens one's emunah. So ultimately, we're going to get to this point where in the maamarim, where that's when we started with Moshe and his being a faithful shepherd, that Moshe developed the Jewish people's das. And developing one's das is what helps one's faith to take root, right? We talk about faith is like encircling on top, but we want it to permeate us to some extent, even though it's encompassing soul power, we want it to affect us. Das affects us. Through activating our das, we also bring our emunah more into our daily self, not just surrounding it. Moshe Rabbeinu did that for the Jewish nation. when in the Midbar, by teaching us Torah. So this Avodah is the food of faith, food that strengthens one's emunah, similar to the way in which physical food and drink bind the spiritual faculties of the soul to the limbs of the physical body. We talked about that in the beginning of the Maimer, right? That physically eating keeps the body and soul together. So what characterizes this Avodah, his taklus Avodah, is the ability to sense the holiness of the letters of the Torah in its letters and logical reasoning, to truly feel the holiness God invested in Torah, meaning not looking at Torah as an intellectual exercise, but when a person can really sense the holiness of the Torah in its letters and logical reasoning, not its like genius, not its like intellectual genius, but its holiness, and to feel the holiness of God invested in Torah. That is what that is the distinguishing mark of this concept of his taklus and this developed das, meaning to understand the inner nature, which is a godly thing. It's not an intellectual exercise, right? Intellectual exercise can remain removed from a person. This is to actually connect. You know, it's like that's this joke. I don't know if it's a true story that did happen or didn't happen or a joke, but they tell a story. I mean, I've said it many times in class. They tell a story about the ethics professor from Oxford who jumped over the turnstile to get onto the tube in England, like without paying. You have to pay a coin, and then the turnstile turns, and you can get onto the underground tube. We call subways in America. And he jumped the turnstile, which is not very high. It's like hip high, you could do it. And he got on without paying. So when he was apprehended, they were like, hello, you're the ethics professor at Oxford University. Like, what did you do? You know, I mean, it's like, how much money was it? $1? I'm saying, so the equivalent of $1. So he said, well, my friend is the mathematics professor at Oxford University, but he's not a triangle. Like, sure, he can study ethics and teach ethics, but that doesn't mean that he wants to be ethical. It's just an intellectual study for him. So that's exactly the opposite of Torah, meaning, in fact, the halacha is if an apostate writes a sefer Torah, you have to burn it. You can't learn Torah from an apostate. It invalidates the Torah learning because the person is not thinking that the Torah is given from Hashem. Then you're not learning Torah. It's not Torah anymore. You're learning whatever it is, right? The person is not learning Torah. So the point, the previous Rebbe, and this comes across in many, many, many of his writings, he wanted so much for people to sense the holiness in Torah, and he's going to go on now to say in davening, just to sense Hashem's presence. Like that's what he was trying to accomplish with, it seems like with this mimer, with many of the things that he teaches. So in Torah, this looks like sensing the holiness of the letters and the logical reasoning. In prayer, the avodah of his taklus is the sensitivity to the divine concepts expressed in the words of prayer. That is to say, not only one's understanding and grasp of the concept, but what one feels. We have to activate our emotions. So that's basically what he wants us to do. And that's what it means to have an activated das. And now he explains, in this avodah of doing this, there are a number of forms and different levels, each person according to their spiritual stature and situation. Right? We don't all do it exactly the same way or to the same extent. This is the meaning of I will sow the house of Israel with the seed of man, Zera Adam, and the seed of animal, Zera Behema. Like we talked about earlier, right? These are two general levels. These are two general categories and levels of souls mentioned above. The souls of Atzilus are Zera Adam, right? That's the highest spiritual world, are called the seed of man. And the souls of the lower worlds, Bri, Tzir, and Asir, are called Zera Behema. They're called the seed of animal. That's the lower world. And as he said earlier, most of us. There's a few who are called the seed of man, but most of us are in the category of seed of animals. I see we have a dog who's listening intently to this class, the real seed of the animal. Maybe he's some sort of spark. He wants to hear Hasidus. In terms of their Avodah, these soul types represent two types of knowledge. One, knowledge in the form of intellectual understanding, which is akin to hearing about. Right? That's what we spent a lot of time talking about. And the second knowledge is in the form of seeing, so to speak, through strong histaklos. That's sort of like the conclusion of this idea. It's not the conclusion of this idea, but like he's just reviewing and basically concluding that, like from the middle of the last section to this section, like this is what we're talking about. This is what we've been talking about. These two levels of souls, these two levels of learning, these two levels of activation. That's what we're talking about. Okay. Now he's going to go on to another idea that's related to this. He's going to go on to another idea, which is the Shema, how it connects to Shema. So we know, just as a little background, that what we call 3 paragraphs of Shema. You're not, okay, the word it's histaklos, not histalkos. There is a word histalkos. The word histaklos was introduced in another class, and it's just being used again and again. It means an intent gazing. So it's referring to that activated das level where a person senses godliness. It also is referring to chachma. Or it's, okay? But histalkos, we talk about when that means receding. That's talked about as the way of saying that somebody's a tzaddik has passed away, that their neshama receded to a higher realm. Histaklos means to gaze intently. So they sound similar, but they're not the same. Okay. Any other questions before we go on? Okay, so we're going to talk about the 2 paragraphs of Shema. Now, we generally call it the 3 paragraphs of Shema, but it's really, so there's 2 paragraphs of Shema, Shema v'hayim Shemaya, which are very similar. Like if you look in your siddur, they're extremely similar. They have very similar psukim. One is in singular, one is in plural. One talks about reward and punishment, the second paragraph, the first paragraph does not. Like there's some very significant differences which are going to play into this idea of the difference between seeing and hearing and the seed of man and the seed of animal. The 3rd paragraph of Shema is actually in a completely different book of the Chumash. Like the 2 paragraphs of Shema are next to each other. They're not in the same parsha, but they're close to each other in parshiyos. There's a whole, and they're very similar in wording. The 3rd paragraph talks about the mitzvah of tzitzis and going out of Mitzrayim. It's connected. It's like we added that, so to speak, that 3rd paragraph of Shema, because we have a mitzvah to say Shema twice a day. We have a mitzvah to remember the going out of Mitzrayim, and therefore we put it together so that we're saying them both, twice a day. Because we have to remember going out of Mitzrayim in the day and the night, as we learn in the Haggadah, right? Like we have to mention it both in the day and the night. So we put it together with Shema so that we do it at the same time. And we also have to connect going out of Mitzrayim to davening, which in the halach of davening, what davening means is Shemona Esrei, the Amidah prayer. So we say it right before the Amidah so that we're going from the mention of going out of Mitzrayim straight into the Amidah, to the standing silent prayer. So we put it all together. It's like a unit so that it works. But we're only going to be talking about now the 2 paragraphs of Shema, which are similar in their content, but have some specific differences, which are some of those differences are going to be mentioned here. So I just explain why it says 2 paragraphs of Shema instead of 3 paragraphs of Shema. What?
So we have a mitzvah to remember the going out of Mitzrayim morning and night?
Well, it says in the Haggadah says, how do you know that you're supposed to mention it only? It looks like you're only supposed to mention it in the day, and then remember Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, I think, says, well, how do you know that you're supposed to mention it also by night? Kol Yimei Chayecha as the days, Kol Yimei Chayecha to include the evenings.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so now, this is the root of the difference between the 1st paragraph of Shema and the 2nd. Our sages relate that the 1st paragraph of Shema reflects a state when the Jewish people carry out the will of God. As a result, they will be worthy of the fulfillment of the prophecy. Strangers will arise and pasture your flocks, meaning that the Jews will not have to involve themselves in worldly matters. Others will do that for them, and they will be able to dedicate themselves to spiritual matters. If you look at the paragraph of the first paragraph of Shema, it doesn't mention anything about the land of Israel and sowing and harvesting, whereas in the second paragraph of Shema, it does. Like that piece is it's added in the second paragraph of Shema, because in the first paragraph of Shema, they're at a level when others will do their pasturing for them. By contrast, the second paragraph of Shema reflects a state when the Jewish people do not carry out the will of God as much, meaning there it talks about reward and punishment and what will happen if they do and if they don't listen and so on. This does not mean that they're actually transgressing God's will, as he's mentioning, but merely that they're not expending maximum effort in fulfilling his will. I mean, there's a whole discussion. This would be like we take out the psukim, we go through all the commentaries on it. It's not that they're actually sinning, but there's a distinction that's made, which is why it says that it talks about reward and punishment there. In the first paragraph of Shema, it doesn't talk about the reward and punishment. Right? There's some distinctions. First paragraph of Shema is singular, second paragraph of Shema is plural, talking about the whole nation. There's differences. So it's like individuals versus the nation, which is also it makes sense in this context that we're gonna be learning it here as well. Okay, so the reason for the difference is that the first section of Shema includes the verse, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, right? It says, V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol ma'adecha, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. The second paragraph of Shema, V'hayim Shemaya, it speaks about loving God with all your heart and with all your soul, but it does not say with all your might. If anybody's ever noticed that, that's right. You can look in the study, you'll see. It just says, it does not say ma'oidchem. So there's a lot of explanations for that, but one of them is that not everybody's at the level of serving Hashem that way. That's why when you're talking to singular, there's b'chol ma'idech. When you're talking to the nation, the plural is nafshechem, levavchem and nafshechem. That could be expected from everybody, but not necessarily ma'idchem. That's gonna make sense, a lot of sense with what we're learning here as well. So the word ma'id, which usually is translated as with all your might, has the same letters, dun, 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 as mem, alf, and daled as adam. If you rearrange the letters of ma'id, you get adam, referring to the souls called zera adam, that's the seed of man. That's just a few people who are on a very high level. That they're expected to serve Hashem b'chol ma'idecha, because they are at that level of adam. It refers to those people who have achieved awareness of godliness as if they actually see it, like we've been talking about. Isn't it nice when everything like fits together like that? It's like, oh wow, look at that and that, and like wow, right? Like this singular, talking about when they're doing the will at the highest level, includes ma'idecha, which that word hints to the fact that we're referring to people who are on the level of Adam, because the letters can be transposed to have Adam. Come on, isn't that interesting, ladies?
Okay. You wonder why you don't see that yourself. Why?
Right. The interesting thing is, right, whenever you learn a Rashi Sikha, right, the Rebbe explains Rashi, after learning the Rashi Sikha, you're like, yeah, of course, that's the only way to understand Rashi. It's like, but then you read the Rashi before you read the Rashi Sikha, it's like, what's going on? And then the Rebbe explains it, and you're like, yeah, of course, there's no other way of understanding this Rashi.
When you'll be a Rebbe, you'll be able to do it.
What?
When you'll be a Rebbe, you'll be able to do it.
Right. Such a state of consciousness is referred to as doing the will of God. This level of serving Hashem, b'chol ma'idecha, at the level of the seed of man, which is this level of activated das, is referred to as doing the will of God. Remember, we said the first paragraph is doing the will of God. The second paragraph, not when they're doing the will of God. It doesn't mean they're actually transgressing. It just means they haven't completely activated their service yet. So this state is called doing the will of God, because as a result of this elevated level of consciousness of the divine presence, referred to as seeing, bonding with godliness, as if they see, they achieve the state of I desire nothing besides you. They just want Hashem. Like the Alter Rebbe talks about how he says, I don't want your Olam Haba, I don't want anything, I just want you. I don't want your Olam Haba, I don't want your Gan Eden, I just want you. Somebody who's living at that level, that's their reality all the time. It's not like sometimes maybe we could get a glimpse of it. It's like that's the reality that they're living in. These people do not desire the lower Gan Eden, the higher Gan Eden, nor the world to come. That's like literally exactly what Alter Rebbe was saying. Since all of these are merely besides you, insignificant and ancillary to you, rather, these people only desire to cleave to God himself. That's the level that we're talking about, the Zera Adam, the seed of man at the highest level. The highest level of that type of person is a person who exists in that manner. Pretty amazing, really. Through this state of striving, now what does it mean? Like he's like reaching towards Hashem. This person is in a state of reaching towards Hashem, which is called ratzoi, which means longing, wanting, and it also comes from the word run, like run towards. So this person is in this state of striving, ratzoi, and longing to cleave to Hashem. So now we're also going to have a play on words. Ratzoi, which means this longing and like running to Hashem, elicit the manifestation of divine will, ratzain. It also shares like the meaning that ratzain, which means the will. So like their yearning and desire and longing and wanting to run to Hashem elicits a divine will in response, because Hashem treats us mida keneged mida, like the way what we give out, we get back, so to speak. But here we're also going to say, this is another transposition of letters, which has the same letters, Reish Tzadik Lav and Nun, as Sinor, which we're going to rearrange the letters. Ratzain, which means this will, can be arranged as Sinor, a channel, or a pipeline. Why? Because this yearning and striving elicits from God's infinite light, from the Baal HaRatzain, the master of will, and an emanation that becomes his manifest will. Meaning, when the person reaches this level of activated das, where he sees God and senses God, and all he wants is godliness, the response from Hashem is that desire of the person elicits this desire from Hashem, this Baal HaRatzain, we're the source of all Ratzain, and then that Ratzain, that desire, which is like connecting him to Hashem, and Hashem's connecting to him, becomes a pipeline. We transpose the letters and it becomes a tzinor, becomes a pipeline that this will of Hashem becomes manifest in the person's life. An emanation that becomes his manifest will. In other words, Hashem's manifest will is this response that the person is eliciting from him. The divine emanation is revealed within their souls and their portion of the world, transforming their perception of the world into something entirely different, because they see the godliness in all things. That's what happened. Like the person has worked on developing their das and their mind's eye sight, and they sense Hashem, and they are reaching out to Hashem, and then it elicits a reaching out of Hashem to them, and a pipeline from Hashem that helps their perception of the world to be something entirely different, because they see the godliness in all things as a result. It's like a two-way relationship there, a positive cycle. Right? This person is doing this, Hashem responds, it helps the person do it better. Hashem is responding. It's all hinted at in the rearrangements of the letters, right? This person is serving Hashem b'chol maidacha. He's at the level of this seed of man. He's working on that insight, sensing. He wants Hashem. He runs towards Hashem. Hashem, it elicits a desire from Hashem that becomes the pipeline. And then he's able to see Hashem better because Hashem is responding, right? So what do they see? They see the divine ayin. What does ayin literally mean? Ayin literally means nothingness. So we say in general, we say that that refers to a level of Hashem, godliness that is above definition. It's not a thing, like literally no thing. It's not a thing. You can't define it. And therefore, it is referred to by mortals as nothingness. In other words, it's not nothing in a derogatory sense. When we say, oh, it's nothing, like that means like meaningless or not important. It's the opposite. It's much higher than anything could be. So it's a no thing because it's not physical. It's like an unthing, It's like, so the person who's at this level can sense the divine nothingness, meaning a very high level of Hashem, higher than comes into the world, and so on, at the level that brings into existence and sustains the essential being of everything that exists. In other words, the level that's above creation, because creation is a thing, but there's levels of Hashem above creation, and that's called a nothing because things haven't been created yet at that level of existence. So this person is able to somehow sense and connect to this level of Hashem, which is above thingness. Right? For these people, the world is a bright place because they see the inner core of everything, its true essential being. I think that is such a beautiful statement. Now, just again, like this is being said by the previous Rebbe when he came to America. Now think about his life before he got to America. He had been imprisoned, I forgot if it's 7 or 11 times, starting from when he was a very young child, under the Tsarist rule, under communist rule. He was in the Warsaw Ghetto. He escaped Nazi Germany. One of his daughters and sons-in-law were killed by the Nazis. I'm saying every regime, he lived through 3 regimes and time periods in the Jewish history that were all extremely antagonistic and dangerous for Jews. And he himself suffered. He suffered terribly under the communist rule, tortured terribly, had what the Rebbe called opposite of life sentence that was commuted. Eventually, he came to America. It was open miracles, complete open miracles. I mean, I don't know how many people had opposite of life sentencing from the Soviets and then wound up in America afterwards instead of never being heard from again. And as we've talked about many times in class, his final Chassidus discourse that we learned, part of it, was Basi Lagani. Hashem says, I've come to my garden. He describes this world as a garden, as a beautiful place. Here he's saying, for these people, the world is a bright place because they see the inner core of everything, its true essential being. The term is lichtige in Yiddish. You see, you can look in the side there. Talks about that, right? That's like that means lit up, like lift, like Shabbos lift. So they were talking about an incredible, just an incredible ability to see beyond the physical shell of something to the inner godliness of something. It feels like the only way he can say that is because he is that. How can he describe this in this terminology? Because he's experiencing it and he's trying to share that with everybody who he's talking to in Chicago then and everybody who's learning it in Chicago now. Like he's trying to share that vision of the world with us, that we should have some small measure of that understanding. But I don't know that term. The previous Rebbe is an incredible writer, incredibly detailed, incredibly descriptive, like really, really shares what's going on. And just this word, this sentence, it just, it's like, feels like it should be put on our refrigerators, For these people, he's one of these people, we could say. The world is a bright place because they see the inner core of everything, its true essential being. And it's just like I just felt like it's an unbelievable sentence. Okay, so the above describes the first section of Shema. Everything we talked about in Tanakh describes the first section of Shema and what it signifies in terms of conscious awareness of God. That's the level of the first paragraph of Shema. The Rebbe now goes on to describe the second section of Shema. So by contrast, the second section of Shema begins with the words, and it shall come to pass that if you listen, right? V'hayim shemaya, if you listen. And listening, remember, we talked about the difference between seeing and hearing. So now we're listening relates to Bina. That's the second level of the intellectual qualities, right? Which involves mere intellectual understanding. Mere. For somebody who got to the level of Chachman and activated Das, Bina's mere. For those of us who are still struggling at the Bina level, it seems like it's quite a big accomplishment if we get some of that too. But in relation, in comparison to the first paragraph of Shema and the Avodah of Histaklos and seeing and sensing and this activated Das, this is a mere intellectual understanding rather than attachment to it through Das as if one sees, right? That's what we've been comparing these two levels. For this reason, this section, the second paragraph of Shema, does not state B'chol ma'idach, with all your might, which alludes to the divine service of Adam. Again, that's the Zera Adam, the seed of man, the souls that are at the level of seed of man. That's the first paragraph of Shema. The second paragraph does not say B'chol ma'idach, because we're not talking about the souls that are on that level of Zera Adam. Rather, it only says B'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshechem. It only says with all your hearts, like plural, and all your souls, plural, with all your heart and soul, alluding to the divine service of Zera Behema, the souls of the worlds of Bria, the seed of animal, which is, like he said earlier, that's most of us fall into that category. Of these two categories, most of us fall into that second category. Which is why when we're addressing that category, I mean, the previous I was not saying this here, but I would imagine it would be sensible to say that that second paragraph of Shema is in plural, right? Talking to the whole nation. That makes, it fits with what he's saying, that possibly we could say that the second paragraph of Shema is in plural because it's talking to the majority. The first paragraph of Shema is in singular because it's talking to those people. Now, of course, both paragraphs of Shema are talking to all the Jewish people, and there's lots of reasons why the first paragraph of Shema is in singular, because we all have to feel our own personal connection to Hashem. We're not in any way saying it doesn't apply to us, but we're saying on this very, very deeper level, it could be hinting to the fact that it's talking about the Zera Adam versus Zera Behema, right? We're not, obviously everything in Torah applies to everybody, just to be perfectly clear about that, right? We're not, but that's the dichotomy, or the comparison between, another level of comparison between Zera Adam and Zera Behema. Now, that's the end of this section of the Maimer. It's also pretty much the end of class. And the last section of the Maimer is gonna like tie it all together, basically, from the beginning to the end. Just like go back to the beginning of the Maimer, as my Maimer usually do at the end, which sort of ties in the whole beginning, which we talking about Moshe and, you know, the difference between Moshe and everybody else and so on. So are there any questions before we end class?
No question, but this is just incredible. This was incredible. And
It's
you're
like a
right.
tapestry. It's like he's weaving a tapestry, right? It's just so, there's a lot of beauty to the, really very, it is very beautiful. But
Well,
okay.
I don't want to go out and do my errands now. Just want to sit here.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
Have a
you so
wonderful-
much for this. It made the Shema so much clearer to me.
Yes.
oh, good.
Yes.
It's, you know, as a side effect of what you were saying.
Right. Well, that's the nice thing about Chassidus.
Yeah.
It affects us in all different ways. That's the whole point, right? It's not only supposed to be an intellectual something, it's supposed to be an emotional something that impacts our service of God in our Torah learning, in our davening, in our actions. That's what he's talking about, right? So it's good that it's doing that. That's what.
But I guess I woke up
intended
a
for.
little bit.
What?
I said, I guess I woke up a little bit about.
Good. Well, we're all waking up. We're all in a process, hopefully, of continuously waking up. Like he talks about between sleeping and being awake, right?
So thank you.
Okay. Well,
Thanks for the video at the beginning of the class also.
Sure. Okay. Have a wonderful day,
It's a
everybody.
really special
Thank
day.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay,
Good
thank you.
job. Have a good chance. Okay. Bye. Bye.